Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi-Cantor Chorny.
All right, let's start off this way. I won't make you stand to do this. We'll consider this a non-canonical recitation of the pledge, but can you all just fill in with me the words of the Pledge of Allegiance? That's how we're going to start and frame this. Are we ready? Do you know this, Yossi? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good. At the end of the learning today, we're going to come back to two concepts. One is the under God insertion, and two, which feels like recent history to some people, and two, we are going to look at what exactly we are pledging to. So, as I mentioned briefly before, there are these packets available called Talmud of America, and these were produced this year by the Pardes Institute in Israel. Pardes is a semi-egalitarian institution in Jerusalem, a study hall and a place where it's neither non-egalitarian nor entirely egalitarian. I had the pleasure and honor of learning there quite a few times over the 2 years when I lived in Israel. And they tend to produce interesting booklets. The reason why I find it fascinating that Pardes Institute, a Jerusalem-based learning hall, produced this booklet is what? What's interesting about that? Well, they're in Israel. To say they're not American is an interesting statement, right? Because Pardes actually has within its makeup quite a few expats, quite a few Americans there, but it's true they're not American as an institution. So fascinating that they want to contend with, be in conversation with the story of America, the 250-year story of the establishment of this country. Does the Jewish history in America predate or postdate those 250 years? All right, look at this room of learned Jews. Yes, in 1654, we officially have on record the first Jews who land on shore, but that's neither here nor there because that's not what today's lesson is about. Today it's brought to us by Dr. David Bernstein, who was the previous Rosh Yeshiva, or head of the Institute for Pardes. He produced one of the 4 essays that was written in this particular booklet. I reproduced that essay in full in this packet, and I want to point out a handful of things. This is going to be a quick shiur, so I'm not going to go in depth, but you can take this home, take the full packet home. Dr. Bernstein wants to speak about the American Declaration of Independence, but not the part that you or I probably know very well. What's the part most of us know? What they make us learn in school. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Also, we have what else? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Fascinatingly, that is what we call like a threefold or triplicate poetic inference in the text, and that's a different one than the one that Dr. Bernstein focuses on. He looks at the very end of the Declaration of Independence and says that the signers, the representatives of the colonies, promised to do what? To risk, quote, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor for their cause. He says the closing pledge binds political freedom to personal risk and collective honor. It's not just a rhetorical flourish because it's a moral commitment. He says that they understand that liberty demands sacrifice. Why can he be so certain that they understand that liberty demands sacrifice? Why can he be sure that the people signing the Declaration of Independence? Because they're in Israel. Because a lot of people died in a war fighting for that freedom. It's an interesting point because the whole measure of sacrifice that they're pledging is something that they've actually already been witness to. And that's what Dr. Bernstein spills a significant amount of ink about. If you look on the back side of that first page, he speaks about the idea that this threefold phrase evokes a concept familiar to the Jewish people, Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. But the sanctification of God's name is one of those misdirective kind of phrases because it doesn't sound like the thing that we use it to describe. When we say the phrase Al Kiddush Hashem, in name of or upon the sanctification of God, what are we typically referring to? Martyrdom. Precisely. Look who read the essay and know what they're talking about. Okay, so it's a Jewish value, and he says tragically a recurring element in Jewish history. It reflects the recognition that there are some things not only worth living for, but even worth dying for. He goes on in the next several paragraphs to acknowledge that why are they familiar with this? Now, Stevie, the answer is, where I think it could be for you, because they live in Israel. Why is this a familiar phrase? Because lately, unfortunately, we've had an enormous revival in saying memorial prayers for people that contain the phrase Al Kiddush Hashem. Typically, we're familiar with this in brighter times when we look back on the Shoah, because we say Al Kiddush Hashem in name of the people who were victims of that terrible historical period. And we say that they died. We not only remember them in the name of having died in God's name, but also when we say the Al Mali that we inserted for several years during the October 7th period, we again said Al Kiddush Hashem, remembering those who died in the name of God. He says that, looking on to the second piece of paper, he says that this is a demonstration of extraordinary courage. What is it that is reflected in this Declaration of Independence phrasing that's familiar with the Jewish perspective on dying Al Kiddush Hashem? So Jewish diaspora Jews, earlier in the paragraph, soldiers, first responders, and ordinary civilians have demonstrated extraordinary courage. It's as if he's saying we're missing the phrase courage from that initial Declaration of Independence sentence. The initial sentence that the original sentence that we have is, our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor are what we will risk for their cause. What does that demand of us? It demands courage. Not only courage, it also demands willingness, and it demands what else? To be willing to die for a cause. Sacrifice. Risk. And a devotion, a sense of devotion. And I would say along those lines, a belief in the cause. Right? We don't just die because we're brave. You don't just go and die in any war because we're brave. Although if you've seen Hamilton, sometimes that's the bone that I have to pick, is that we don't get to dig deep enough into the notion that some of those young, fierce, brave, and potentially a little bit dumb soldiers were just there to be brave and to have courage. But Hamilton's voice comes in again and again saying, if you stand for nothing, then what will you fall for? As if to call our attention to the fact that we are not just in this life to risk our lives just for the sake of being brave or courageous, but rather for our lives, our fortune, and for sacred honor. So the Declaration of Independence focuses on why on earth we would be so courageous and be so brave. Looking at the bottom of the page, this is the part that I want to focus on in his essay. He says, and yet there is a tension embedded within this idea. If there are things worth dying for, how do we ensure that we do not lose sight of the equally important truth that there are things worth living for? The danger of an overemphasis on sacrifice is that it can overshadow the quieter, ongoing work of building, sustaining, and nurturing life. How many things are Jews supposed to die for? 3. And how many things are we supposed to live for? Everything else. Everything else. From the beginning of the essay, he brings up what he probably thought was his core point, but I didn't see as his core point, which is that this entire phrase reminds us a little bit of the Shema, because we say, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol meodecha, with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. He says now, coming back to that idea towards the end of the essay, the daily recitation of the Shema offers an important corrective. And while its words echo the total commitment that might, in extreme cases, demand martyrdom, its daily rhythm situates that commitment within the ordinary flow of life. Translation: generally speaking, the commitment for which we keep going back to the quote, for which we want to risk our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor, take away the risk part, and the Shema tells us that every day we're living for sacred honor of the following things: loving God with our heart, with our soul, with all of our might. It is about everyday choices, he says, acts of kindness, moments of integrity, the use of one's resources for good. It is about living a life that continually reflects one's deepest values. Similarly, the ideals of the Declaration are not fulfilled only in moments of dramatic sacrifice. They are realized in the ongoing work of creating a just society, in civic engagement, in the protection of rights, in the willingness to take a responsibility for the collective good. The pledge of our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor is not only a call to heroic action, but a reminder of the enduring obligations of citizenship. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to tell you, I think I came up with the best close to this essay. The best therefore, meaning this is a great intellectual discourse, but now I have a little bit of a call to action, and we have to go back to the Pledge of Allegiance, okay? So I want to bring you a little something from my book, a little preview. I've been doing a deep dive and research into the Pledge of Allegiance, and even if you think that you're like really baki, you're really knowledgeable in the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe I'll share something new with you this evening. You'll tell me if you knew everything I already said after the fact, and then maybe I'll incorporate you in more footnotes in my book. So does anyone know in what year the Pledge of Allegiance was initially introduced? I would be so impressed. That was a late addition to the pledge that comes later. You're definitely on the right track. But when was the pledge originally introduced? It was introduced in 1882 by a minister. His name was Francis Bellamy. And he published a pledge for millions of American school children to recite on Columbus Day. Remember Columbus Day? The text of the pledge actually has remained fixed since then, and I'm going to share with you a conversation that I had verbatim with my son when he matriculated into elementary school. He went into, I'm getting there. Yes, undergrad is coming. I've got a whole thing. It's not fixed, but it's remained almost exactly the same. It's remained a fixture, and we have not changed what we're pledging, what we're talking about. We've added a phrase. I'm getting rid of that phrase. Here's a verbatim conversation I had with Yossi. I tell you, it just happened, Michael. It's recent history. It just happened. Okay. So the pledge, this is the age test in the room. Okay. So Yossi was going into kindergarten, and it was the following thing. So he had started saying the Pledge of Allegiance every day. And I said, oh, that's cool. I also said the Pledge of Allegiance every day when I was in kindergarten. And he said, really? What pledge did you have to say? And I said, the same one. And he said, whoa, the pledge must be ancient. And I said, well, your grandma and grandpa had to say it, so it's older than me. It isn't ancient, but it did get a little bit stale. And what's interesting is that in 1954, we won't get too much into the political history of this, but the words "under God" were added to the pledge. So that's only as recent as 1954. So basically, only for half of the history of the pledge have we had the addition of "under God." Does anyone, though, know where "under God" comes from? I learned about this from a Supreme Court case. Does anyone have any idea why the words "under God" were the words that were inserted? Not you. So it was absolutely, certainly politically inserted as an anti-communistic phrase. And a lot of linguists and historians think that it was gotten completely wrong. And here's why. This is the interesting history. So in the year 2000, don't quote me on this if you know the legal history, 2004 or so, 2003, 2004, a case made it to the Supreme Court. It was an atheist dad who was upset that his daughter was being required to say the Pledge of Allegiance. And at the time, the Pledge of Allegiance, including the phrase "under God," came into the political and sort of civil discourse again. And there's a linguist whose name is Jeffrey Nunberg, and he said, "Under God" never belonged in the pledge, and here's why. Because "under God" is a phrase that was lifted when they were deciding what phrase would they insert in 1954. It was lifted directly from the Gettysburg Address. And when it was used in the Gettysburg Address by Lincoln, the phrase, actually, Rabbi Deborah Silver this morning mentioned something very similar to this. The phrase meant something completely different. Remember she said demeans meant something different? "Under God" meant by God, like the way that we would say by God. "Under God" meant like by a swear to God, under the swearing of God's name. It was never meant to mean what it meant, and so it was completely corrupted by being used in the exact way where that the folks in 1954 intended to use it. And what's interesting about that to me, as somebody who's looking at the history of it, is that the effort that those who were reconstructing the pledge, trying to make it not stale, not fixed, the effort that they went to be cute and to use a historical phrase ultimately undermined a lot of the project in making it sound both older, but also it's a little bit defective in the transmission of what that phrase was ever meant to be. Did you want to say something? Right. So politically and historically, that's fascinating that indivisible comes to basically qualify something that falls after a phrase that did ultimately divide the people. A lot of the amendments and civil rights legislation came to fix some of the things that seemed like a mismatch between the pledge and also the reality that people were seeing out there in America. Okay, let me tie this back in to the essay that we read earlier. I think what's fascinating about the pledge is that all of these things are a little bit misdirectional, meaning that the pledge itself has plenty of elements that make people uncomfortable. "Under God" will be the first thing that comes to most people's minds because we know the history of the discomfort that Americans have found in that phrase. But I am bothered, now having read this essay by Dr. Bernstein, that the pledge itself is so what's the word I'm looking for? It's so benign next to what it could have been if the pledge itself had actually pledged to have us doing something or thinking about something differently. Had the pledge itself contained the terms that we pledge to risk our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor for their cause, that would have been quite the different pledge. But instead, if you listen to the language, we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and then another clause, and also we pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands as one nation indivisible. It doesn't require any action at all, as opposed to the Ve'ahavta, which asks us to love God every day with all of our heart, all of our might, and all of our soul. And so I'm not upset or frustrated with the content of what the pledge does or doesn't ask us to do, but rather with what it actually speaks to in terms of the reality of our country and what we might be pledging ourselves to, but rather that it doesn't pledge us to action. And I think that this essay is a beautiful... Oh, okay. Michael says allegiance itself is action. Say more. Great. Okay, I'm gonna echo what you said, and then I'm gonna take the last word on it. But I accept and acknowledge what you said as being 100% true. That allegiance is in and of itself an action, that it requires fidelity, fealty to a nation, a certain sense of loyalty to a nation. If our loyalty is called into question, that we pledge ourselves to this country, and that will require some action of us. And I'll say two more things, that I think that this essay points out to us that there were existing other phrases from our history that we could have used that would have actually named what some of those actions could have looked like, and that could have done better by us. And also that we are empowered by our liturgy every day to think about being much more active in the way that we do, in fact, pledge our allegiance.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.